After people had been vanishing in Toronto, police were closing in on a serial killer. When they finally swarmed a property, they found a 9th victim tied up with a bag over their head. Was he alive or not? This is the terrifying case of the Santa serial killer. During Pride Festival in Canada in 2017, Andrew Kinsman disappeared. He was the 8th man to disappear from the local area. Locals were terrified, understandably, that a serial killer might be on the loose. 7 years earlier, in 2010, within 4 months, 2 gay men vanished from the neighbourhood of Church and Wellesley. Now, this was actually the gay village of Toronto. 18 months later, another disappeared. Interestingly, all 3 were middle-aged immigrants. Police very early on received an anonymous tip linking the men to a man called Bruce. Despite this though, police felt that they had their hands tied. They had nothing really to go off other than the fact that there was this man out there called Bruce. Then in 2012, police in Toronto received another disturbing tip. This time the caller said that a cannibal was on the prowl in the area. It was discovered that someone was posting on really disturbing underground websites claiming to have eaten brown flesh. Now, investigators actually managed to trace the person that had been posting this online. They linked the post to an email address from someone claiming that they were a silver fox. Now, this email was traced back to a man named Bruce Arthur. Bruce was a shopping mall Santa Claus. He'd also worked as a gardener previously, and that is going to be very significant later on in the case. No one had any idea of Bruce's dark past. He'd had a troubled childhood, being raised by a very violent alcoholic father. Now, Bruce was actually a gay man, but was forced to hide his sexuality due to his religious upbringing. He ended up marrying a woman called Janice Campbell, who was his high school girlfriend. However, behind the scenes, he was wrestling with his true sexuality. He secretly had affairs behind his wife's back with men. When Janice discovered this, she was obviously heartbroken and divorced Bruce. No one could guess the horrors that were about to unfold. Frustratingly, when officers interviewed Bruce, they said that they found him to be cooperative, helpful, and really friendly, so they just let him go. They said they had no evidence to link him to any of the disappearances. However, more men began vanishing. The total rose to 8 men, and Bruce's final victim would be the one to lead him to police. When officers entered Andrew Kinsman's apartment, they were looking for clues. Was there anything inside the apartment that indicated where he was planning on going? Luckily for investigators, he was a very organised man and had kept a log of his plans each day. On his calendar, he documented that the day he vanished, he had an appointment at 3 p.m. with someone called Bruce. Obviously, this was extremely significant. Did they finally have enough evidence to arrest Bruce with a crime? They scoured the CCTV of the local area and managed to capture images of Andrew getting into a red van prior to disappearing. Police were able to track the vehicle and actually found it at a wrecking yard, still intact. They examined the car for forensic evidence and actually found blood inside the vehicle. They sent it off for testing, and lo and behold, it came back as a match to Andrew. So they then went back to Bruce and seized his computer. If they'd done this originally, it may have actually saved victims. On the computer were extremely disturbing images. All of the men that had vanished had been killed, put into positions, and photographed. Police knew they had their killer, but they couldn't celebrate yet. The race was on to try and catch him red-handed and apprehend him before he could take any more victims. They placed him under 24-hour surveillance. The surveillance officers had instructions to arrest him if they saw him with anyone else. Suddenly, on a snowy morning on the 18th of January 2018, 66-year-old Bruce was captured on surveillance, walking into his apartment with a young man. In a dramatic turn of events, police swarmed Bruce's house. By the time they entered, the man he was seen with was already tied up in Bruce's bedroom with a bag over his head. If they had been any later, he would have been Bruce's 9th victim. But there was another horrific fact that officers were about to uncover. While working as a gardener, Bruce had placed large plant pots in a customer's garden. Cadaver dogs alerted police to these and found inside body parts. Bruce was given life without the possibility of parole for 25 years. He will be 91 when he is eligible. Imagine being wrongfully convicted of murdering your own baby. This is the incredible story of how the TV show Unsolved Mysteries helped to exonerate an innocent mother. Patricia Stallings was born in the 1960s in Missouri. She actually had a really unfortunate childhood and was born into poverty, and at some point she even experienced homelessness. When she was young, she fell pregnant and had to give her child up just due to financial issues and the fact that she couldn't even look after herself. She did the right thing for her and she gave the baby up for adoption. Now, when she reached her 20s, her luck began to change and she managed to get a stable job working in a shop. She ended up meeting a man called David and the pair fell in love and got married shortly after. They got a little house together in Jefferson County, right by a lake, and it was just the ideal future that she'd always planned. Patricia then fell pregnant again. This time though, obviously her circumstances were completely different and she just knew the pair were ready to be parents. She knew that this time round she was able to be an amazing mum. In April 1989, she gave birth to their son Ryan. However, the pair's dream turned into a nightmare when Ryan was just 3 months old. He became really unwell and was struggling to breathe and being really sick. Now, Patricia and David did what any good parents would do and they got their son medical attention straight away. He ended up in hospital where the doctors and nurses ended up discovering what they thought were high levels of ethylene glycol in Ryan's blood. Now, in layman's terms, this is very toxic and it's stuff that's found in antifreeze. The staff at the hospital began to get immediately very suspicious of the baby's parents. They alerted authorities and the pair were interrogated at length at a time when they were obviously very distressed because their child was dying. The pair were split up and they were just bombarded with so many questions. They started accusing them of poisoning the child. The authorities would only let the parents see their son under strict supervision, and then on one occasion, Patricia was allowed to feed him. Following on from this, his condition got worse and worse, and the staff put 2 and 2 together and immediately presumed that this was due to Patricia being left alone with him. Police decided to search the pair's home, and lo and behold, they did find antifreeze. They felt that this meant that they were immediately guilty, despite the fact that a lot of people do have antifreeze in their homes. As Ryan's condition progressively got worse, Patricia was banned from seeing him. This was even as he was passing away. After his death, Patricia was immediately charged with murder. Interestingly, while she was awaiting trial, Patricia was actually pregnant with the pair's second child. Things then got really complicated as she gave birth to this child that they named David Jr., and he was really ill too. He was immediately placed for foster care, but interestingly had very disturbing symptoms, just like his brother Ryan had had. Doctors diagnosed David Jr. with a very rare genetic disorder called MMA. Interestingly, when people have this disorder, their body produces an acid that's very similar to that substance found in antifreeze. Now, David Jr. got the medical care he needed, but it did shine a light on the fact that the parents might actually be innocent. Had a huge mistake caused an innocent mother to not only be charged with murder, but also miss her dying child's final hours. Infuriatingly, the judge in Patricia's case refused to let the defense present this as a theory. At the age of 25, Patricia was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for Ryan's death. That's when, thankfully, in 1991, the show Unsolved Mysteries covered Ryan's case. The episode covered the theory that Ryan may have died from MMA. As luck would have it, a biochemist saw the episode and offered to test Ryan's blood. This caused a huge breakthrough. Ryan was found to have high levels of propionic acid just like his brother. Patricia had not murdered him with antifreeze and she'd been locked up for nothing. Thankfully, she was released from prison and David Jr. was released back into his parents' care. Patricia later sued the hospital and won millions of dollars. It was summer 2021. Married couple Bart and Krista Halderson were a lovely pair by all accounts. They kept themselves to themselves in Windsor, Wisconsin. They had a gorgeous house together and 2 sons. Mitchell was 24 and again, much like his parents, kind of kept himself to himself. He had a good job and he was engaged. Then there was Chandler, who was a year younger and he was actually at college studying IT. On the 2nd of July that year, strangely and most out of character, Krista never showed up at work. Now, her colleague Daniel knew her very well and just knew that this wasn't like Krista. He got really concerned. He tried to ring her, text her, but she just wasn't answering. He thought the only other logical step was to actually drive to her house and see what was going on. Once he got there, he saw her son Chandler, and Chandler actually told him not to worry. His mum and dad had actually gone to the family cabin due to an emergency with the plumbing, and they would be back after the weekend. Now, Daniel thought this was very strange because, again, Krista hadn't been kind of in contact to say she wasn't coming to work, but he was slightly relieved by this and he went home. He trusted what Chandler said. Why would he lie? However, the weekend came and went and Krista still didn't show up at work. So by the 7th of July, days and days had gone by with no contact from either of them as far as anybody knew. Daniel spoke again with Chandler and kind of said, look, you probably should actually ring the police right now. Chandler did what he was told, rang 911 and told them that his mum and dad had been picked up before the weekend by a couple he didn't know, and then he just didn't know what had happened to them. Chandler also decided to kind of make use of his time by going round door to door around all the neighbours and even waving on their Ring doorbell cameras saying, have you seen my parents? By this point, the oldest son, Mitchell, had also heard about his parents' disappearance, so he actually decided to drive to the family cabin himself and meet police there. Now, it was actually a really long drive. It was like 3 hours from his home, but he just really wanted to see where his parents were. Police, as I said, met him there and they scoured the property, but it actually appeared that nobody had even been there at all that weekend. So what about the so-called plumbing emergency? Chandler's story didn't seem to be adding up, so police brought him in for questioning. During his questioning, a damning eyewitness report came in. A local farmer said that he'd actually seen Chandler walking from the woods a few days before he had reported his parents missing. Lo and behold, when officers searched the area that Chandler was seen in, they found human remains. Just days after this, they were identified as Bart. Chandler was arrested and the hunt was on to find his missing mother. Now, Chandler's girlfriend was actually really helpful and let police look through her phone and download all the information they could off the device. Something that they spotted on Snap Maps was really helpful in this case. It identified that Chandler had been near the Wisconsin River on the 3rd of July. Police ended up searching it and lo and behold, they found Krista's body. Chandler was now charged with his mother's murder too. He pleaded not guilty, but prosecutors would argue that he committed the horrific crimes because his parents found out he'd lied. He'd been creating fake email accounts to make it look to them like he was still attending college, which he wasn't. He was also captured on CCTV buying tarp, and blood was found in the basement of the family home. He was given life without parole for the double murder of his parents. This woman's affair with her married boss ended in deadly consequences in the middle of a car park. Candy and Rob Hall had been together for years when they moved to Idaho from California in 2006. The pair had 2 teenage daughters and they both had fairly good jobs. Candy was a paralegal and Rob was a computer specialist. However, behind closed doors, things weren't as picture perfect as they seemed to the outside world. Candy had been heartbroken to find out that her husband had cheated on her. He'd been having an affair and Candy blamed herself. She felt that maybe it was her fault that the relationship between them had gone stale, and the pair decided to try and work things out. Candy's self-confidence had really taken a battering as a result of this. She ended up finding comfort in her colleague Emmett Corrigan. Now, it was 2010 and Candy had just started working at Emmett's new law office and they instantly clicked. They had chemistry, they really got on together well as friends and were also attracted to each other. However, Emmett was also married himself. He had a wife named Ashley and the pair had 4 children together, and Ashley was actually pregnant with their 5th. The chemistry though between Emmett and Candy was undeniable. They started an affair of their own. Within a matter of weeks of working together, Candy and Emmett were being intimate behind their partners' backs. Candy stated that Emmett had been giving her the attention that her husband just wasn't, and it was a real ego boost for her. Meanwhile, poor Ashley was left confused as to why Emmett suddenly had gone cold with her. She never felt threatened by him working with Candy, as Candy was nearly 10 years older than her. By February 2011, Emmett was spending less and less time at home. Now, heartbreakingly, Ashley really couldn't put her finger on what had gone wrong in her marriage, and even went to marriage counselling on her own to try and patch things up. On the evening of the 11th of March, things would unravel in the most devastating way. Emmett and Ashley ended up in a huge argument over the state of their relationship. Things got extremely heated, and Emmett was still refusing to tell her the truth. Emmett said he was leaving to get some space and was going to Walgreens. Meanwhile, Candy also announced to her husband that she was going to Walgreens. The pair met up and Emmett drove them off in his car to a remote place to get intimate. However, Candy had not been as sly as she thought she had been, and her teenage daughter actually called her asking what she was doing. It turns out her daughter had spotted her in the car park. Her daughter told Rob that she'd seen her mum in this car park, and Rob ended up deciding to drive down there himself. CCTV captured Rob walking around trying to locate the vehicle that his wife was in, and then turning around and going back to his vehicle. Rob rang his wife and confronted her and realized she was with another man. Away from view of the CCTV, a fight broke out. Then gunfire was heard, and suddenly Emmett was lying bleeding on the ground. Candy rushed over and started kissing him as he lay passing away. She then placed a call to 911 while screaming at her husband. Now, poor Ashley found out about her husband's death and affair at the exact same time. She actually got remarried in the end and became a successful author and public speaker, which I'm really happy about. As for Rob, he would later claim that his gun just happened to fall out of his pocket during the fight and went off and shot Emmett. He was convicted of second-degree murder and given 30 years behind bars. Candy actually also ended up being put in prison for 18 months for stealing $30,000 from a previous employer.